Good afternoon. This is What Matters Gulf Coast, episode 55. My name is Susan. I'm your guest host for today. V is out for today, and we are praying for her and her family right now. So, thank you guys for joining us, and thank you for joining us each and every Sunday at 3 p.m. for our live shows. Today's show will be a slight different, a pre recording from our guest. And we're excited to have him on. And he's going to give you a bunch of information regarding our criminal justice reform. Our guest today is Mike Nicholson. He is an Arise policy analyst whose work covers numerous consumer and human rights issues, including payday and title lending reform, public transportation, and criminal justice policies. Mike originally joined Arise as an organizer in 2018 before moving to the policy team in 2022. He holds a BA in political science and sociology from the University of Montebello and a PhD in political science from the University of Alabama. So I'd like to introduce to you guys Mr. Mike Nicholson.
Hello, everyone. I My name is Mike Nicholson. I'm a policy analyst with Alabama Arise. I want to start by thanking What Matters Gulf Coast Media for having me to take some time to talk about criminal justice reform in Alabama. Today, I was going to spend a little bit of time introducing y'all to my organization, Alabama Arise, what we do, why I think that you might find that important, talk a little bit about the issues that we're involved with, and then kind of what went down this last legislative session in terms of criminal justice reform, and give you all the information you need if you would like to get involved or plugged into that kind of work. So I'll start off real quickly, just kind of letting you all know Alabama Rise is a nonpartisan nonprofit group. We're a membership-led, membership-driven organization. We have over 150 different member groups. It's a coalition of churches and other nonprofits like Greater Birmingham Ministries, the Southern Poverty Law Center, groups like that, as well as 1,700 individual members who are spread throughout the state. So we have a kind of unique model. I don't want to say unique, but an uncommon model when it comes to advocacy, in that our issues and the things that we work on are very much driven by the folks that we hope to serve. So in a lot of organizations, the policy analysts and the team that's doing all the lobbying and the work at the legislature is kind of working on the issues that they think are important. Well, at Alabama Arise, we actually have a meeting every year where our membership gets together and picks our issues for us. So we know that the issues that we're working on are what the people, we're hoping to serve actually care about. So we go to great lengths to connect with our members. We go to great lengths out to the community to kind of solicit feedback, just to make sure that we're doing what we need to be doing and we're doing the work that needs to be done. So our organization was founded on issues of inadequate state budgets and an unfair tax system. But every year, our membership selects 4 or 5 other issues for us to work on. This past year, one of the issue priorities that was selected was criminal justice reform. And as a policy analyst, that's one of the issues that I focus on. So these are kind of, it's a very broad subject, criminal justice reform, but these are kind of some of the more specific things that we've been focusing on. So one of the things that's important to us is reforming Alabama's system of fines and fees. This system is the result of, budgets that are constantly underfunded because of our upside down tax system. And as a result, our criminal justice system relies on fees that are, levied against people that enter our criminal justice system. So in a sense, we're really criminalizing poverty in order to pay for our criminal justice system. And that's something that really needs to be reformed. Another thing is Alabama passed the Alabama Habitual Felony Offender Act, the HFOA, which is essentially a version of a three strikes law, which means that after you've had two prior convictions, no matter how you know light of an offense your third offense is, you can receive a very, very harsh sentence. This has led to a lot of our population being imprisoned for very long periods of time for very light offenses. And it's led to a number of issues such as overcrowding. And that's something that we're certainly hoping to work on. Another thing that Arise has been involved with for over 10 years now is death penalty reform. As I'm sure most of you are aware, there's a number of problems with the death penalty. There have been many instances where folks have been exonerated after they've been executed by the state. We know that there's a racial bias when it comes to sentencing and death penalty reform. A couple of years ago, Arise worked with a number of other partners to overturn judicial override in our state. So this was a situation where a jury could decide not to send someone to death row, but a judge could essentially overrule that jury and send someone who had been convicted to death row. So that's no longer something that can happen in Alabama. Unfortunately, it wasn't retroactive. So there's about 35 people or so on Alabama's death row who were sent there by a judge instead of a jury. And so that's something that we would like to see changed. Additionally, under death penalty reform, we're one of only a handful of states that doesn't require unanimity. So this means that it only takes 10 jurors to decide to sentence someone to death in Alabama, when in almost every other state, you need all 12. You need a unanimous jury verdict for that death penalty conviction. So that's something in death penalty reform that we're very eager to make right. We're also involved in reforming Alabama's civil asset forfeiture laws. So these are laws that essentially allow law enforcement to confiscate property from individuals, and you don't actually ever have to be charged with a crime. The police can actually take your property, any money they find on you, even vehicles sometimes, if it's suspected to have been involved in a crime. And then it's up to the person whose property has been confiscated to prove that it wasn't used in the commission of a crime. And as you can imagine, this can be a difficult, if not impossible, thing for low income people to do. If you have your car seized by the police and then they say, okay, you can have it back if you can prove that you weren't involved with this crime, that's pretty much an impossible thing for most people to prove unless you have a significant amount of money at your disposal. So we don't collect a lot of data on that. A couple of years ago we did pass legislation that began collecting data on the types of things that are being seized, but based on the data we have from other states, we know that these asset forfeitures tend to disproportionately impact low income people and disproportionately impact people of color. And most of these seizures are for pieces of property, are around $1,000 or so. So these aren't like drug kingpins that the law enforcement agencies try to make them out to be. These are pretty much everyday people who get their property seized and have very little recourse when it comes to getting that property back. And then kind of finally, we're also, part of a coalition that's concerned with the living conditions and the overcrowding in Alabama's prisons. If you weren't aware, there's an ongoing crisis in Alabama where we're actually being sued by the the federal Department of Justice because of the living conditions in our prisons because they're so overcrowded. Our state actually chose to use some of the money that was given to the states as part of the federal government's CARES package to pay for new prisons. So we are getting 3 new prisons, but we're concerned that even with the building of 3 new prisons, it's not going to adequately address the problems that have resulted in that lawsuit. So those are some of the bigger, broader issues that we're focused on. Um, The way our model works is we have organizers who go out into the state. They solicit feedback from communities, from members of our organization to find out what's important to them. Then we meet as a group once a year and they pick our issues. And so, under criminal justice, our policy team has really focused this past year on 7 things. So, this past legislative session, we were really focused on the suspension of people's driver's licenses for their inability to pay fines and fees. So this is a really big problem. What it really does is it creates this situation where someone can, basically be charged a fee or, a traffic ticket, some kind of violation, and because they can't pay that fee, they're then they then have their license revoked. And so what ends up happening is, they can't go to work. They can't participate meaningfully in a lot of ways in society. And so to us, this is just really nonsensical, right? You really want those folks to have their driver's license because you want them to be able to go to work and pay off those fines and fees. But right now, that's not the way that our criminal justice system is working. The second thing that we're really focused on is voting rights restoration. So in Alabama, it's pretty easy to lose your right to vote once you've been convicted. We're a state that has never made it very clear or very easy how the process works to get your right to vote back once you're released. Um, a couple of years ago, Governor Ivey worked with the Department of Corrections and the Department of Justice to try to create a more clear guideline. But when folks are, released from prison or jail, it's not usually that high of a priority for them, and it's usually a pretty confusing process. So we want to make that process as simple as possible. We know that, the percentage of people who have their voting rights taken away are disproportionately people of color, disproportionately low income people. And those, to us, that's really a violation of people's constitutional rights. So that's something that we're heavily involved with in terms of reforming that process. Community corrections is another issue that we've worked on this past session. We advocated for a bill that would require all judicial circuits to create a community corrections program. There's some kind of mixed feelings on that within, the advocacy groups that we work in. On the one hand, community corrections can offer a really viable alternative, solution for folks to keep people out of prison and kind of give them a chance, especially when it comes to things like drug offenses, to really avoid prison in a meaningful way and allow them to continue participating in society. But on the other hand, there is evidence that shows that these types of programs, if not administered properly, tend to benefit the wealthy and tend to exclude folks from low income areas. They do, some of these programs have a tendency to require continual drug testing, but then it's up to the person to pay for their own drug tests. So this is, of course, going to make it very difficult for low income people to participate. So in the right circumstances, community corrections can be a very powerful tool to, prevent folks from getting dragged into the criminal justice system for low level offenses, but we want to make sure that those are administered properly. Death penalty reform, we didn't have any bills on the unanimity that I talked about earlier or the retroactivity of judicial override, but those are certainly issues that we tend to focus on. We did have a bill this past session that would have weakened the Habitual Felony Offender Act, but unfortunately that didn't pass. We're also advocating for better open records when it comes to our state and how our criminal justice system works. One of the bills that did pass this session was a bill that would require municipalities, so especially cities, to keep and submit records of the fines and fee structures and submissions that they get every year. So this would give us insight into how these municipalities operate, into how they're funding their local systems, because we find that those systems tend to disproportionately rely on fines and fees of low income folks in order to keep those systems running. And then finally, as I mentioned before, civil asset forfeitures is an unfortunate problem in our state. We did help pass a bill a couple of years ago that began collecting data, but that bill was not as strict as we would have liked in terms of the type of data collected. We know that other states have found that there is a huge relationship between the likelihood of your um, assets being seized and your race, especially African Americans are more likely to have their property seized in a number of states. Their data has shown this, but we haven't set up a system of reporting that allows us to really dig into that question. So we advocate for that data collection to be disaggregated by race, so we can have a better idea of the way that process is disproportionately affecting people of color, because we strongly suspect that that is the case. So I just a quick kind of recap of what happened this last session. This was a tough session for a number of reasons, but primarily because it happened right before an election year. So we saw a lot of legislators, kind of focus on bills that they thought might be beneficial to them during their election, which is, pretty much the norm. But this means that it wasn't a year where folks were particularly compassionate about a lot of these issues. So we're hoping that next year a lot of these bills will see a little bit more movement. But I want to highlight a couple of bills that did pass that we think are really good and moving our state in the right direction. So like I mentioned before, a bill was passed that establishes a database to collect information on the fines and fees that are collected at the municipal level. This is going to be really important for researchers, for analysts, for advocacy groups. It's going to allow them to paint the picture that we really need of what that system looks like, and how our cities are paying for their criminal justice systems, and how that payment structure is really disadvantaging low income people. There was also a bill passed that allowed for the judicial discretion of sentencing for probation violations. So up until recently, we had some of the most strict laws in the country when it came to limiting what judges could and couldn't do when someone violated their parole. This bill specifically would allow judges the ability to take, factors into consideration, and possibly, have leniency when certain things or certain factors are considered. So in general, we're very supportive of judicial discretion, because we find that judges are able to take, the nuance of the situation into consideration, and that allows for a more fair sentencing structure. Another bill that passed that we were extremely uh, grateful to see sponsored by Representative Jeremy Gray was the creation of a 180-day grace period for people to repay court-imposed fines and fees following their release from incarceration. So this gives folks 6 months to focus on housing, to focus on employment, to focus on health care, to kind of get their lives back together before they're immediately asked to start repaying some of those fines and fees. So there's been questions about, where's that money going to come from? And a lot of those questions, I think, um, are a little bit misguided, in that this bill doesn't forgive that debt. This bill doesn't, let these folks off the hook in terms of paying those fees. It just kind of gives them 180 days to focus on the things that you would expect folks who are just released from prison or jail to really need to focus on, so that they can get a job and start paying those fines and fees. So if anything, this bill will likely allow folks who otherwise wouldn't pay their fines and fees back to be able to get, back on their feet and able to pay those fees. And then finally, a bill was passed to ban the routine shackling of incarcerated individuals during pregnancy and labor. It's honestly a shame that it took legislation to do anything about this, but Alabama is again one of only a handful of states that would routinely shackle incarcerated women during pregnancy and labor. This bill doesn't completely ban that, or this law doesn't completely ban that, but it does restrict the situations in which that can happen. So that's obviously something that um, we think is atrocious and something that certainly needed to be addressed. And we appreciate Representative Hollis for her bill there. We also saw movement on a couple of bills that we really were hopeful, and they moved pretty far in the legislative process, and we're really going to focus on these bills next session. The first is the creation of a community corrections program in every judicial circuit. So this was a bill by Representative Judge Hill. He's the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. He has a lot of insight into what our criminal justice and corrections programs need. And this idea of community corrections is certainly something that I think in the right context can be really beneficial for our state. And the bill that honestly was the hardest for me in terms of not making it across the finish line was the bill that would have stopped the state from suspending folks' driver's license for financial inabilities to pay. Like I said before, this is a kind of self-defeating practice. You want folks to be able to pay their fines and fees, but then if you take their license away, you pretty much remove any opportunities that they're going to have to work and to pay those fees off. So it's a very punitive policy. It doesn't make sense. That bill made it through, one chamber of the legislature, and then it made it through the committee of the other chamber. But unfortunately, it was never brought up for a vote on the final day. But we're very hopeful that next session we're going to have a good shot at moving this legislation again. And then finally, I did want to point out that our organization is heavily involved in the um, process of expanding Medicaid in Alabama. So the federal government has offered numerous financial incentives to states to expand Medicaid. And what I mean by that is basically raise the threshold so that lower income folks qualify. In Alabama, we're kind of in this situation where, a lot of folks make too much money to qualify for Medicaid. We have some of the most strict requirements in the country. So Medicaid is the health insurance program that is run and paid for by the government. But we have a lot of folks who make not enough money to qualify for the federal marketplace that was set up by the Affordable Care Act. So our estimate is that somewhere around 350,000 Alabamians are in what we call the Medicaid coverage gap. And those are folks who make too much money to qualify for Medicaid, but not enough money to qualify for the marketplace. So we've been advocating for an expansion of Medicaid. And one of the products of that expansion would be to greatly improve access to mental health services and to drug rehabilitative services, both of which have been proven to severely reduce the incarceration and recidivism rates of folks in our state or in other states. So expanding Medicaid would go a long way in addressing the overcrowding and the very poor living conditions in our prisons currently. So that's just kind of a quick breakdown of what happened this past session. I did want to give us an opportunity to check out Alabama Rise's website. On our website, you can sign up to receive what we call legislative updates. So if these are issues that are important to you, you can sign up and we'll send you, an email alert that says, tomorrow, during the next session, tomorrow there's going to be a committee vote on the driver's license bill. Would you be willing to click this button and give your representative or your senator a call and offer support? So if that's some advocacy that you're interested in, you can sign up through our website. We'd love to have you join as a member. We ask folks for a $15 donation to become a member, but that gets you access to our action alerts and it gives you access to our annual meeting so that you can actually take part in the process through which our issues are selected. And there's also under the Get Involved tab on our website, there is an option that allows you to track bills of interest. So during this past session, this would have allowed you to kind of look through the bills that were being brought up and discussed. And next session, it's going to allow you, if you're interested, to track those bills that are important to you. So yeah, this is it right here. On the left-hand side, you can select the issue priorities. So if you clicked on like criminal justice, for instance, it would filter those to just show you the bills that Alabama Arise is working on that are involving criminal justice. And as you can see, a number of those are the bills that we talked about today. This shows you the bills that we support. It shows you the bills that we're opposing. It lets you know what those bills are going to do if enacted. And then it gives you kind of an update of where those bills are. So as you can see, some of them died, some of them were enacted, some of them made it, pretty far along the legislative process. But this tracker just really lets you stay involved, keep in touch, and keep an eye on that legislation that you might find to be important. So that's really all I had today. I'm happy to answer any questions. If anyone wants to email me, I'd be happy to talk about, the legislative process, how Arise works, any of the issues that you think are important, how you can get involved. Our goal is to really create a more equitable state. And when it comes to criminal justice, we know that because of the structure of our tax system, we're underfunding our criminal justice system. And as a result, we're having to use a system of fines and fees to prop up a criminal justice system on the backs of low income folks. And that's something that needs to change. There are a number of other things as well that we've talked about. But if this is something that you're interested in, you want to get involved in, please shoot me an email, give our office a call. I'd love to hear what you think and get you plugged in so we can start working to change Alabama together. So thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it, and feel free to email me with any questions. Thank y'all so much.
Hold that. Thank you very much, Mike Nicholson, for sharing with us on criminal justice reform that you all are working on at Alabama Arise. We'd like to thank you all for joining us today for What Matters Gulf Coast. I hope that the content today was valuable to you. Please check it out over again so that you can learn what's happening here in Alabama and across the Gulf Coast. We thank you again for joining us and hope you'll join us again next Sunday for our show at 3 p.m. Live. And hopefully that you're already following our page. Our page is still under the name Keeping It Real with V and G. So go ahead and follow the page until we get our name changed over. So we hope to see you again next Sunday. And thank you for joining us today again. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye.